Can everyone take their seats? Folks out in the hall who cannot hear me, I'll be loud and project and say, take your seats. All right, they're sort of coming back. So welcome everyone. This is our last session, and this is another round of lightning talks. Before we get those going, our partners here at the Newseum and the Freedom Forum Institute let me know that there are free tickets to the Newseum available before you leave. So if you would like to see this gorgeous building, which I suggest you absolutely do, please be sure to pick up a ticket on your way out. And they are good for 2 days, so you can actually enjoy this multiple times. So that's a wonderful thing. So people still sitting, that's okay. We'll get it going here. I think once people start, we'll do that. So as a reminder, these are lightning talks. So our speakers are going to come up on stage and be fast and inspire you and say interesting things. Then applaud wildly for them when they are done. They'll sit down. After our final speaker of 3 goes, I'm going to bring back all 6 of our lightning talk speakers to the stage. They'll sit here, and it is time for you all to ask questions. I'll get to play the just like, pass the mic type thing. So that's how that's going to work. So without further ado, I am going to welcome the first of our next 3, and it is Charles Koch from the National Review. Welcome, Charles.
So in America in 2019, the biggest challenge to free speech online is me and you. I'm not being facetious, it's us. It's not the man anymore. It's not a lack of accessible technology, and it's not the size of our wallets. There is a paradox here. Legally speaking, free speech has never been better protected in the United States. Never. In fact, legally, we're freer to speak today here than anyone has ever been in the history of the world. We have no Alien and Sedition Acts, no pro-slavery gag rules, no blasphemy laws, no First World War era espionage acts, no fire in a crowded theater Supreme Court decisions that sound good in theory, but in practice lead to the imprisonment of presidential candidates or to immigrant socialists handing out leaflets against war. In America today, you can call for an actual revolution. That's sedition. You can call for a revolution and you're fine. You can say pretty much whatever you want about the president, about Congress, about your least favorite billionaire or celebrity, and nobody will do anything. You can mock the government and its employees. You can call the Speaker of the House a dictator. You can say the governor of Texas is plotting a coup, or the IRS is hiding in your basement, or the member from Delaware fantasizes about torturing animals. And you can lie horribly about history. I don't take any pleasure in that as a historian, but you can. You can endorse slavery. You can praise the Holocaust. You can say the Holocaust didn't happen. You can string together into a sentence all of the most upsetting words and ideas that you can conceive. And you can do this, and nothing will happen to you. And if it does, it'll likely be overturned because the Supreme Court is uniformly in favor of free speech these days, 9-0. It's unanimous, united. One of the only things in the country on which there is agreement. Now, the question before us is, can we overcome present-day challenges to grow an internet where speech and democracy thrive? Speech and democracy, of course, are not the same thing. The First Amendment that is emblazoned on the side of this building represents a paradox too, because although free speech is necessary to the operation of democracy, its regulation is taken away from that democracy. The First Amendment starts, Congress shall make no law. Libertarians such as myself sort of wish that was the beginning and end of the whole Constitution. But they put it in the First Amendment, and that limits the democratic participation in setting speech regulations. And finally, it was not always true in America, finally we've got to the point at which that is true. So I think a better question is, can we overcome present-day challenges to grow an internet where speech thrives? Now, the first part of the answer to this is yes, if we continue to insist that democracy stays away in this narrow area. Now, about the internet bit, it has never been more easily utilized. Whatever you want to say in America, you will not lack for a microphone or for a front page. I wouldn't have my job, but for the internet, I wouldn't be in America, but for the internet. The barriers to entry are just hilariously low. Facebook is free, Medium is free, WordPress is free. Twitter doesn't just give you a free account, it actually, in practice, allows you to send messages to almost anyone in the world without knowing their phone number, their address, or anything about them. Trust me, I know. This can be good. I mean, I've been able to ask questions of the world's greatest experts simply by logging onto Twitter and giving it a shot. People will respond. This idea would be alien and incredible to my grandfather. In 2019, if you look at it from the perspective of history, every single one of us has both our own printing press and a guarantee that the government will not come in and smash it or confiscate its fruits. This situation would be regarded as extraordinarily enviable to almost any person who has ever lived, be they rich, poor, black, white, devout, atheist, what you will. And yet, in my industry at least, and in others I see, we spend an awful lot of our time trying to ruin that, voluntarily. In a formal sense, we don't have gatekeepers in the way that we once did, but de facto, we do. People who can leverage mobs to drive others off of social media are gatekeepers. People who call up the employers of those who have different views than they do are gatekeepers. People who put into place rules that force others to be silent are gatekeepers. People who have decided that they know what is reasonable and what is not, and set about enforcing that, are gatekeepers. A couple of years ago, I debated NYU's Ulrich Baer at Kenyon College in Ohio. And he told me very openly that it was his job at the college to work out what speech was too offensive to minorities to hear. He's just written a book making exactly this case. How arrogant. How condescending. There are a lot of Ulrich Baers on the internet, unfortunately. And when you think about it, that is deeply peculiar. We got rid of the laws, and we cut out all the men in the suits, and then we set about replacing them with whomever manages to gain enough followers and institutional power to exile their enemies. Now, I'm not talking here about argument, I'm not talking about debate, I'm not talking about pushback. I'm not talking about revulsion, the revulsion that we all feel when we see somebody who is bigoted or exclusive. I'm talking about mob rule. One of the most popular concepts on Twitter among the journalist class, the people to whom this building is dedicated, is the ratio. And for those who don't know, one is said to have been ratioed when one writes a tweet that yields many more negative responses than it yields likes or retweets. Why is that important? What of value does that tell us? Why on earth would we assume that that is reflective of truth or quality? Others among us have responded to our opportunity by quite literally asking to put more men in suits in charge of the internet and its platforms. Some of these people are conservatives. They want Washington to tell Facebook or Twitter what to do. Others are progressives who want to empower the government to decide what is permissible to say and what is not. They're all wrong. The solution here has to be cultural. We have the legal regime, finally, in America. We have the technology. What we lack still is the heart. I'm worried that we're going in the wrong direction. I'm worried we're seeing a rapid growth of a cultural attitude predicated upon the idea that free speech is advantageous to the powerful, and maybe that it's even part of a long-held establishment plot. This is nonsense. It ignores human history. It ignores that it was Protestants that benefited from the printing press, not Rome. It ignores that it was the revolutionaries who benefited from the pamphleteers, not the king. It ignores that it was the abolitionists and the civil rights champions who benefited from the open exchange of ideas, not the advocates of the status quo. Conservatives will not change the culture by asking Josh Hawley to superintend the internet. And the marginalized will not improve their station by handing the powers of censorship to those who live in marble towers or to Donald Trump and the police. None of us will become more intelligent or more interesting if we join the roaming mobs. So the threat today is us. It is me. It's everyone in this room. Can we overcome present-day challenges to grow an internet where speech and democracy thrive? Depends on the users. We have before us the greatest opportunity we've ever had to learn, to share, to argue, to convince. If we don't take it, we only have ourselves to blame. Thank you.
Awesome when they move for you. Thank you so much, Charles. Our next speaker is Seema Swayko from Arena Stage. If you have not been to Arena Stage, go. It's fabulous. Seema.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I work in theater, not technology, not the law. At Arena Stage, we produce a diversity of American voices. Our work is live, and at our best, it's passionate, thought-provoking, dangerous, deep, and dependent on the freedom of speech. Theater thrives when the characters in our plays and musicals can speak freely, not just from the heart, but from their guts, and say things that may be disagreeable to some. Our industry of live theater depends on this. So yes, speech free of government censorship is critical. And with more and more theater being recorded and posted online, this freedom of government control in the online space is also very important to theater. But those of us who work in theater, we deal in words and dialogue. We use words to make meaning, to make story. And we know that speech and words have a cost. While the theater needs freedom from government control over content, our characters' words cost them something. And in fact, that is what makes drama. The building blocks of drama are action, conflict, event. Action, in theater terms, is what a character wants. Conflict is what is keeping your character from getting what they want. What's their obstacle? An event is whether or not they get what they want. And if they don't get what they want, did they get something else, something they didn't bargain for? And that event causes a change. Now your character wants something new. They have a new action. That's how drama works. That also happens to be how life works. For example, action. Let's say your action this morning was that you wanted to come to this event early. Conflict, your obstacle was your morning commute. And today, someone cut you off on the road, you got into an argument, you were in an accident, and you became an hour late to the event. So, event, you did not get what you wanted, which was to get here early. Instead, you got mad, you got insurance problems, and now you have a new action. You want to get your car fixed, and sitting at this event is your new obstacle to fixing your car. So now, in this example, your speech and the speech of the other driver wasn't censored, but your speech and your actions cost you something. So it is in theater. The words the character uses cost them something. It's not free. And so when I think of free speech online, I think, yes, let's preserve freedom from government control, while we also think of our own self-government. We've been living with the public web for about 30 years. How have we each self-governed ourselves in the online space? What are the norms we've created and evolved over time? When I think of the future of free speech online, I think about the need to develop online literacy in our citizenry, cultivating in each person the ability to think critically, rigorously, research what one encounters online to surface truth, while also developing self-government and an awareness of the costs of words and the examination of one's own core values. I don't think kids learn that today, and I don't think many adults ever learned it. The idea of critical thought and the examination of core values. Online literacy and education is an area where I think we need to invest deeply to preserve democracy. After all, it's been said, democracy without education is hypocrisy without limitation. Now, when I think of self-government online, I extend this to corporations and businesses that exist online. I just directed a play at Arena Stage by Sharon Rothstein called Right to be Forgotten. It told the story of a young man who stalked a girl for 3 months when he was a nerdy kid in high school. Someone wrote a blog about it, and he became a meme. And now, 10 years later, when you Google him, what comes up is stalker, rapist, attacker, and most of that isn't true. So while working on this play, I had the chance to speak with the folks from Center for Democracy and Technology, experts from ACLU, Google, Facebook, the FTC, Future of Privacy Forum, Electronic Privacy Information Center, International Association of Privacy Professionals, etc. And I heard from people all along the full spectrum of opinion about whether or not we should have a right to be forgotten here in the US. And I flip-flopped my opinion throughout the process of directing this play. But where I've landed now is, yes, people should have a right to petition a corporation to adjust the curation of their online life. After all, search engines are already deciding the order in which you encounter information when you search for someone or something. It's an algorithm, but that algorithm was built with assumptions. The current system already puts the control and the power in the hands of the search engine. Let's allow individuals to harness some dignity back. The potential for self-government by providing the opportunity to petition that choice that the corporation has already made for you. Now, since I work in theater, I could not leave you without playing a theater game, right? I'm seeing the eye rolls already. This is a game about interpretation. This is one example of what I mean about online literacy. So many fights on the internet start from misinterpretation. An actor knows that any line can be read 1,000 ways. So here's a little acting exercise for all of you. Let's say that someone tweeted these words, "I love you." Can everyone say that out loud? 1, 2, 3. Great. Now, what did that person really mean? Let's say it was a tweet from you to your significant other. How would you say that out loud? On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Oh, so much love in the room, right? Now, let's say it was a tweet from someone you just argued with and you are apologizing. How would that sound? On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. A little remorse in there. Now, let's say it was a tweet from you to the President of the United States. So take a moment to think about how you feel. I know there are a diversity of feelings in this room. And on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. I didn't say to change the words. So yes, speech, free of government control in real life and online is necessary. But emotional intelligence to interpret meaning, education to research and surface truth, exploration of one's own core values, and ultimately self-government is necessary to democracy and civil society online and in real life. Thank you.
What I love about Seema's work and the right to be forgotten, if you did not go see it, it just ended, so you can't go see it now, unfortunately. But it does bring the issues to life, and it shows the very human side of the work that we do in technology and internet policy, and that was very important for the folks at the Center for Democracy and Technology. We're glad to work with you on that one. And now for our final lightning talk speaker, very excited to have him here, Lual Mayan with Junub Games. They are games for peace, right? Welcome, Lual.
Thank you so much. It's not easy to be the last speaker, right? But it's really amazing to be here today and also like share my thoughts about and my vision of the future of speech online, and especially with my background. First of all, my name is Lual Mayan. I'm from South Sudan. How many people have been to South Sudan? So yeah, we're talking about like the future of online speech. Imagine a country like South Sudan. What should we be talking about right now? Because it's a country that has been ripped by civil war for a long time, and one of the most dangerous thing in the country right now is the hate speech online. It's people telling stories that are not true, and that has actually caused so much violence in the country. And especially because we are from a country that has almost 64 tribes. There's so much diversity. There's so much, people don't understand really what one person is saying. And that's actually one of the major causes of the conflict in South Sudan. So until we really find out what can we do with the information, what can we be able to tell people. And today when the organization reached out to me and said, hey, Lual, come and share your thoughts. And I was like, okay. That's because like with real my background, you heard before, like I'm a founder of Junub Game. It's a video game company. So our main focus of the company is to make video game for peace and conflict resolution. Because when you look at the video game industry, it's one of the most growing industry right now in the world. And especially even people right now just sit down and watch people playing video game. And even like on Twitch, people like the information, people chatting and everything. How do we filter that out? It's not about like countries that are going through war. It's about really how do we really modify that and tell people the truth. And that's why I started my company to be able to make video game that can be able to like to change the mindset of people. I remember my family flee South Sudan in 1993. So, and I was born on the way as they were going to a refugee camp. I've been living in a refugee camp for 22 years. And I came to the United States about 2 years ago when I started my company. And really what inspired me to start making video game for change was one day I was sitting on my computer and my friend, because I was living in northern Uganda, my friend installed for me a video game called Grand Theft Auto on my computer. And then on my mind, I never thought actually video game are created by people. I thought they just fall from heaven. Because like I have no idea, I was at this environment where like what you think about is to survive. There's no food, there's no water. Like living in a refugee camp was not easy for us. But when I started playing Grand Theft Auto on my phone and my computer, I realized the power of video game. I realized that video game are not like movies where you just sit on your couch and watch. You make decision when you're playing video game. And I can give you one example. When you play with your friend and your friend kill your character, the way you react is, it's not like, why did you kill my character? It's like, why did you kill me? You see, like it's becoming part of you. And I feel like that medium, that community can be a very good practical way that we can shape the future. I'm launching my mobile game called Salam. It's coming on a platform that have over 700 million players. It's an online game. And the game is about putting a shoes of a player in a refugee. It's about like for a player to be in the shoes of a refugee, for them to understand the journey of a refugee. Because the whole idea is because when we think about making policies about refugees, we really don't understand them. Today when I go and meet someone who make policies and I tell them like, I'm a refugee, it's like, really? Like they're surprised, like how did you actually start making video game? I had to walk 3 hours every day to charge my computer. There was no power in the refugee camp I was in. But I was so passionate about creating something that can be able to change the world, that can be able to like, when I was in a refugee camp, my mother worked for 3 years looking for $300 to buy for me a laptop. Just for me to be able to create a medium that can bring people together, that can bridge the communities together. And I feel like video games are really very, very good tool. And I can tell you one example of the industry. We have a lot of video game coming up. There are millions of players online playing. And we look at serious game are not already like in the platform. People like create their own game and publish them by themselves. But my main focus and with my company is to be able to like publish this game. People play them on Steam. We have like the world premiere for my game is coming on December 12th. We are premiering at the Microsoft Theater in LA because we want people to really understand the power of video game and how this medium can be able to change the world and how this medium can actually lead to like a betterment of online speech, because this is a product that is with people every day. You go on a plane, you play a video game. You go on a train, you play a video game. Every time you play a video game. But how do we utilize that resources to be able to create something that can better I know we have children who play video game every day, but like, have you thought about it? How can you actually like use this to be able to like help other people? I have a board game called Wider. It's about conflict resolution. It's a game that brings people together on a table and they discuss about conflict and creating their own resolution to conflict. And they've been using it right now for teaching in school like Georgetown, University of San Diego, to be able to like utilize the gaming space, because we cannot have like a better online speech when we don't have peace, when we don't know how to resolve conflict, because those are pressures that are given to us. That's why like I'm so frustrated. So what should I do? I go online, but because that's the only resource that I have to be able like to express my feeling or whatever, whether it's right or not. We don't have. It's so hard to control that until you help people to change their mindset, to understand really what the future means for them. And that's why like I was like, it's great for us to like have some kind of a medium to be able to help other people. So that's what we do, and thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah.
Have a seat, that was good.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let that go. Thank you so much. That was really inspiring. I'm going to invite all of our Lightning Talk speakers back on stage. I'll read their names again, and you're all going to be passing mics. So again, we have Abdul Hamid Bilici, Amber Balde, Charles Koch, Hoda Hawa, Lual Mayen, and Sima Sueco. So let's give them all a round of applause because they are here. And there she is. All right. So now this is to you. This is all your chance to ask questions. We're going to have some folks passing microphones. Jamal over here. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. I can't really see people, so I'm going to move over here. In the shortness of questions, I will ask the first one. What is something that you took from someone else's talk? What inspired you that you heard from someone else today among you?
Actually, I was inspired by everybody. Some of the things I wrote down, Abdul Hamid, when you talked about how we'll all be tested, and it comes down to our integrity, that really resonated with me. Amber, you said we need an insurance policy on reality and take back our agency. That really resonated me. Hoda, you talked about cultural strategy. A narrative builds power of people, and we need a whole society approach. That resonated. Charles, I loved you talking about how we're all the gatekeepers, and we've lost the heart, and that the threat is us. And Lual, I'm so amazed and can't wait to learn how to play your game. And you talked about how your game allows us to step into the shoes of the refugee, which is about building empathy. And so I guess I was really moved by the humanity that I felt that each of you spoke about.
I mean, I too was really inspired by everyone. I think we are all tackling this issue of the future of speech online in very different ways. And I think, you hit the nail on the head when you said that the element of humanity is, I think, intrinsically woven in all of the ways that we are creatively trying to ensure that there is equity and justice for all online and in the digital space. And I think that ultimately we are all trying to ensure that we are building this free space online for everyone and all communities to be to be safe and engage without throwing any other communities or individuals under the bus, so to speak. So I think that that's really important. I think that was sort of the thread that I took from everyone's talk.
Sure. I really enjoyed this last conversation about the video games. I mean, I founded a startup too, and I mean, it was not nearly as hard. I feel like I could, 3 hours a day, I can barely make it from my bedroom to my kitchen to my computer. I mean, holy cow. it is fantastic to remember that as half of the world's population is coming online over the next 10 years, that there is just such a massive pool of untapped talent that if people have the ability and the access, and that we build with a sense of nothing about us without us, where we're not performing this kind of like new generation of technical colonialism into these populations. But if we can get people to build what they see and their dreams, it is not a foregone conclusion that the companies that happen to be at the head of the leaderboards today are the head of the leaderboards tomorrow. Our top 10 Fortune 10 companies are not the same Fortune 10 that were there 100 years ago. Even though we still might recognize a number of logos, we've all seen companies blow up that we never thought we would see fall from multi-million or billion-dollar market caps. And so it's very hard, I feel like, sometimes to sit around and feel like everything is already etched in stone and we're fighting these monsters and megaliths that have no chance of changing, but they can. And so it's worth it to continue doing this work.
Well, the last speech demonstrates the scale of a challenge in a way that we don't normally see in America. I started my speech by saying, in America, I think they were my first two words. When I say it's up to us, the stakes are fairly low. Last night, my 3-year-old came into my office with the mail from the mailbox. He handed it to me, and then he said, I'll open it, and then, Daddy, I'll show you how to read it. And I thought this was cute, so I tweeted it out. And of course, because it's Twitter, then someone was deeply offended by this and said to me, you're a terrible parent. You gave your kid the impression that you can't read. I mean, firstly, I don't even know how that came from, because I taught the kid how to read in the first. How do we think he just did it on his own? And this annoyed me, and I was listening to your speech and thinking, God, I really am just a pathetic human being, because what you're discussing is war. You're talking about consequences that are so far. And so when we say it's up to us, which it is, that has some consequences like mine last night, and then it has some very real consequences. And I think that was an absolutely invaluable reminder of that.
Yeah, for sure. Everyone has been amazing today. And if I can say, like, what I learned today is just taking action. Like, if we don't take action, it's going to be hard for us to, like, make changes. So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess when I started as the first speaker, it was a very tragic story and very gloomy. I understand, I guess. I feel still depressed because of the things that I am going through. But when we came to the last speaker, we saw that there is a hope out of even the worst situations. And people, if we like, can contribute out of all very negative situations. And also I saw that we are having different backgrounds. Some of them are technology-oriented CVs, and some of us journalists, some of us politicians, but some of us from art world. But all of those backgrounds can be a mean to something positive, something greater for the humanity. So this was hope-giving for me. Thank you.
It's almost like we planned it that way.
The plan worked.
Thank you for doing my work for that one. Questions from the audience at this point? Oh, right here.
Charles Koch's comment, we're all part of the problem, we're all part of the solution. What can we be doing?
Well, I think one of the odd things about the internet is that you can't see the person. And I do this as well. I react to my computer as a proxy in a way that I just would not in real life. I wouldn't do it to anyone on this stage. I wouldn't do it to you. I've never met you. I would never speak to you in a way that I would occasionally, in frustration, talk to someone online. And it takes a lot of discipline. I mean, again, let's just keep this at the everyday level we encounter, not the Civil War level, which is another question completely. But I really think that you talked about digital education. That's the first thing. And I really am not exempting myself from this. I'm so guilty of it. But that's the first thing to do. And I think the second thing to do is to recognize that it doesn't often matter what someone said in Washington State when you're sitting at home at 6 o'clock on a Friday night in Florida. You don't have to get involved in that. You don't have to pile on. You don't have to have an opinion on it or try and make them feel bad or convey to them that they're a terrible person. So I think that we're the ones ruining it. And we can stop doing that by remembering that everyone involved here is a human being.
Any other thoughts on that? You don't have to have thoughts, it's okay.
No, I just think, I would totally echo your sentiments. I think we can be a lot busier than we are, and sort of like getting on Twitter on a Friday night and getting into a fight that we just have no business getting into. But ultimately, I think just going back to realizing the shared humanity in all of us, research shows that when you know a person, when you know a community, they become more human. And you generally tend to have more favorable views of that person or of that community. And so taking those interactions from offline and into the real world and getting to know people and getting to know communities, I think is a very important piece that, we focus so much on the digital space that we're, I think, starting to forget about the real life interactions that we still have to have and that we still need to continue to have. Digital literacy, media literacy is super important, but what about these one-on-one personal interactions as well?
Okay, we have a question over here.
Thank you. My name is Yaya Fanusi. Usually I don't make a question to the panelists. I will just make an observation which they think about it. It might help them later on when they do further presentation. Over the whole day, one of the things we've been talking about is us using and benefiting from the technology. I came to this country 50 years ago, 52 years ago, really, and America was a culture embedded with critical thinkers. It's now the opposite, and I don't think they're getting all the values of what you're talking about. Thank you.
Okay. A question over here.
When it comes to content moderation and respecting each other's personhood and humanity online, how important would you all say it is that people are expected, or in some platforms required, to use their actual name, their legal name, versus a pseudonym, even if it's a persistent pseudonym, the name they go by on a platform? Should we push people to always use their quote real names, or is there value to letting people be pseudonymous?
I mean, that's definitely an interesting question, and I think that context plays a big role into it, because you may have, for example, journalists who are reporting in a place that is not necessarily the safest for them to be reporting and using their real name, and so using a pseudonym might be life-saving for them. I think in terms of trolls who are just trying to hide behind a pseudonym, I can't imagine anyone. Maybe there are people out there, you didn't teach your child to read, but there are people out there that would argue that everyone has the right to use it. I don't think that I'm necessarily making the argument that it's all or nothing, but I think that context is really important when trying to figure out this key part to trolls, online hate, and hate speech.
I think it's easy to look at negative kind of trolling comments and think that somehow real identities are going to, or human identities are going to solve that. But I think it's also true that sock puppets save lives. So we've seen over and over that underrepresented populations, when they're forced to use human-based identities, are then the target of hate speech. You also have sex worker populations and other vulnerable populations that are engaging in kind of edge case communications, where they need to have some kind of degree. The journalism thing is a good example of pseudonymity in order to engage in their work. And there's also a certain amount of honesty that can come from anonymous interactions where they're not negative from the get-go. For example, myself as a woman in tech used to be on IRC in an extremely gender-neutral way. If I was forced to have my identity precede me in those communities, often I would be prejudged. And so it's great to be able to say that you're someone else and to be able, in a similar way, to kind of step into those shoes. So there's a lot of talk now about kind of decentralized identity, and we need to make sure that the people engaging in those conversations understand that we are different people at work, at home, on Twitter, when we go to a sports game, and that we have kind of a sanctity for the different verticals in which we live.
Question over here.
Tasima, could you talk more about the effects of misinterpretation and what can be done to deal with that and reduce the negative?
I'm going to repeat that question just quickly since the mic wasn't working. The question was to Seema, could she talk about the effects of misinterpretation, correct? And what can be done to counter that?
Good golly, I work in theater, so I work in the field of interpretation and multiple interpretations of things. What a good question. I guess really my point about that was how can we cultivate in ourselves the ability to read something and question use our emotional intelligence to try to understand what somebody is trying to convey. Oftentimes you can only do that by actually speaking with someone and hearing their voice and looking them face to face, eye to eye, and really understanding. I feel like I don't quite have an answer for you. The effects of misinterpretation can be devastating. It can break friendships, relationships, destroy communities. What we do about it, I think, is on each of us as our own personal gatekeepers, self-discipline, and maybe just very deliberately reaching out to somebody who we might think might be saying something about us or saying something that we don't understand and actually asking them, what do they really mean? This is a small side story. When I worked at Pasadena Playhouse, a theater in California, one of our board members came into my office one day. I'd just been there for about a month, and she just said, I just don't know about this whole diversity thing. And, you know, she was talking to me, and you can look at me, and I was like, oh, you know, my hackles went up at first, but then I thought, okay, she came into my office. So what does she mean? So I said, why don't you sit down and can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that? And she said, well, I love all the shows that we do, but when we say it's an African-American version of Kiss Me Kate or an Asian-American this, I can't get my friends to come to it. And I said, so if your friends came to the show, do you think they would like it? And she said, yes, our work is great. They would love it. So I said, are you telling me it's a marketing blurb that's standing in the way of your friends coming to the show? She thought about it, and she said yes. And just that transaction of her walking in and saying, I don't know about this diversity thing, and I had two choices. I could have said, well, too bad, sister, we're doing it, you know, or just ask her what she means. And in asking her what she means, it actually led to something really great. And she and I then became allies over the next 2.5 years, very intentionally building a space at that theater that allowed us to engage all peoples who had come there historically, as well as communities that theater had never connected with previously. I don't know if that's a tangent, but thanks for your question.
Yeah, I can add in support to what you suggest. We had a practice in our country, in our newspaper. You know, when you think about Turkey, you could imagine a lot of conflicts in many ways. The Turkish Kurdish, the secular Islamic, conservatives, progressives, Alawites, Sunnis, etc. So it is very easy to gain one of those groups' support and then earn some money and profit out of that. But is it good for the society, for the humanity? So we thought that we could have a contribution to the to dialogue between these different conflicting groups. So we decided and act against the current, not acting with the current, but acting against the current. So what we did, we invited reasonable intellectuals, peoples from these different segments of society. So we invited, for instance, an Armenian columnist to contribute to our newspaper. So this is revolutionary when you think Turkey. You know, there's lots of historic conflicts. I don't know how much I can go here, but when I was visiting our readers sometimes to interact with them, so they were starting, why you have an Armenian columnist, and I was trying to explain my point. And I was feeling that at the end of our conversation, they were understanding and then appreciating it. So their existence in our newspaper was reminding us to check whatever we were reporting about. So we were thinking that we have an Armenian friend sitting next to me, so I should be careful about that. So those kind of things, I mean, are very much helpful. You know, people are inimical or misunderstanding when they don't know. So most of those things, problems and conflicts are stemming from not being exposed or not being able to look from other person's angle. So when you bring them together in a, I mean, reasonable, with good understanding, with good intention, it helps a lot. We saw that. So we were proud of having those diversity of voices. And then it became a kind of contribution to other people that this is something good that we can cherish about this diversity. And they were learning from different perspectives, maybe first time.
That's wonderful. Any other questions in our audience? I'm looking. Oh, I do see one, sorry.
Yeah. I'm so appreciating the thoughtfulness about these issues and the deep commitment on the part of all the panelists. And my question has to do with some comments that I've noticed throughout the day about being distracted by technology and technology being kind of addictive and designed to be so. And so noticing historically the parallel between the rise of the internet and the neglect of our physical environment and the destruction of our physical earth, is it possible that our collective addiction to speech online with one another has been part of our neglect of our planet?
Wow. All right, who's up?
There's a theory that we'll be at some point able to upload our brains into a computer. And I suspect if that comes to fruition and is acceptable and affordable for most people, they will stop going to the gym.
Just don't do it in the playground.
So yeah, I think naturally, I clean up less, I spend less time reading, I get hooked on enormously silly things that actually bring me very little in return. I can't see any doubt that we do the same thing en masse. The one exception or the one counter-argument is that although I said earlier, and I think this is very important, we really should not go down rabbit holes on a Friday night where looking at some controversy that doesn't matter in a place we don't live. It is still true that you find things because of technology that you never would otherwise. Now, this isn't related to the environment, but when I was a kid in England, we didn't have many roller coasters in England. I'm a huge roller coaster nut. I know a stupid amount about roller coasters. I go around riding them. I've been on about 500. It's an obsession. I'm a child. Who cares? But in England, I spent so much time when we first got the internet and the computer finding out about all these roller coasters, because America is absolutely full of them. And there's just no way that I would have been able to do that in any other circumstance. Now, that of course, is not greatly important to the world. It made me very happy, but it wasn't very important to the world. But when you're a little bit older and you discover that the whole sum of human knowledge is online, then there is a countervailing force to ignoring the environment, because you suddenly learn what it looks like to go into Venice. Maybe you can't afford to go, but you can watch a video, and maybe you see what's happening in Antarctica, and maybe you know what villages look like in Peru. So I think that there's no doubt that what you just described is happening, but I do think there's a balance there, and I think it's possible to get that balance right as long as you keep in mind what matters, and what doesn't matter is fighting with strangers on the internet.
I'll throw out the trope about correlation not being causation, I guess, but I'm part of a group that the World Economic Forum has now that's called some sort of Center on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's like a very fancy name, but they're trying to pull together people that think about like machine learning and Internet of Things and decentralized systems and all these things to kind of figure out how this is changing the way that we work and approach the world and things. And I think if we look back at the third, second, and first kind of industrial revolutions, they continue to be incredibly impactful on our planet and the way that we use resources at a very unsustainable rate. However, over the last 100 years, the number of people that have been pulled out of poverty, it far exceeds any prior era in human history. So we are using things faster, and we are creating more people who collectively have more. It's not as much of a zero-sum game as we thought, but the planet maybe is on the other side of the end of the zero-sum game right now. And so perhaps a side effect of that is that we spend a lot more time talking to each other in places that we wouldn't have before. But I don't know if it's as simple as the internet being the driver of our downfall.
Well, if I can put you on the spot, I feel as though you might have a really interesting perspective in terms of someone developing games and whether, interacting in that way is for the positive sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question in a way that it depends on how we interact with the design and really what you want to achieve with that, especially in the space. I can give an example of the community, of the game community. For example, like we have like this online big community without like the interaction of the reality on the ground. Exactly, you don't know like what is happening in the ground, or actually like what you're interacting and how you're helping that. So that's why like we're putting like you might be like playing Fortnite, for example, and you play like a lot of time. Maybe you spend almost 5 hours a day, 3 hours a day, but you're on this platform where you don't actually really understand like what you're interacting with. And I create this space. My game is going to be like one of the first game to bridge the virtual world and the reality on the ground. So what I mean about that is when you play the game online, you have all these characters you're feeding, you're giving them medicine, you're like having this fun, like you're playing the game. But every time you play the game, you actually purchase something. Like if you purchase water in the game for your character to have energy to run, you're actually buying someone in a refugee camp water. Mm-hmm. When you buy food in the game, you're actually buying someone in the war-torn country like food. When you buy clothes in the game, you're actually buying someone in that country like clothes. So it's like technology can be that. It can be that bad. It can be that good. But depending on how we are trying to utilize it. We can use it for destruction. We can use it for change. We can use it for whatever it is, but there's no way that we are going to avoid people from using it, because like we are in this generation whereby it's all we want. It's all we want to interact with. It's all we want. That's why some people love to work at home. Some people are prepared to go to work. So like that, there are a lot of advantages that we can be able to utilize for good, yeah, if that helps. I don't know.
Thank you. That's it.
Can I just applaud that? That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm glad I put you on the spot for that one. Thank you. We're going to wrap up the Q&A session now, so thank you so much. Let's do another round of applause for all of our wonderful speakers. Thank you. I'll now invite you off the stage. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's amazing. Oh, sure. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You were so good. And we are almost at the close, but you got 2 closing acts, so I'm going to tee up the first one. One of our wonderful partners here who also happens to be a new father, so clap for that too. Jesse Blumenthal from the Charles Koch Foundation and Stand Together. You heard from him before, so I'll welcome him to stage. Welcome, Jesse.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian, and thank you for the unsolicited shout out to my now 1-month-old daughter. So, I realize that I'm standing between everyone and drinks, so I will try to keep it brief, but Brian did ask if I would offer a couple of closing thoughts on the day as a whole. So the first thing that I want to do is thank CDT, Brian, and Emma, and Liz, and the whole team there, thank the Freedom Forum Institute, and the entire event staff that made this day possible. This has been the third year of an ongoing partnership and a commitment to, quite frankly, bring together people who aren't always in the same audience and aren't always on the same stage. And it never ceases to amaze me the sort of spark of magic that happens when you break a little bit out of your comfort zone. The Stand Together philanthropic community, which includes the Charles Koch Institute, Americans for Prosperity, a couple of the groups you've heard from today, is committed to work on technology and innovation policy and on free speech. We believe that innovation improves people's lives. We believe that free speech is essential for a free and open society. And as Charles Koch talked about earlier, that has both a legal and a policy component. It's important for us to get those right, and we work in that space. But it very much has a cultural component. As we look around today and look at, a variety of calls, especially in the United States, for calls to and appeals to nationalism or populism or socialism or protectionism, they come from different parts of the political spectrum, as quite frankly a lot of the folks involved in putting this event together do. But what those ideologies all share is a belief in a top-down approach, that someone knows what's right for how each one of us ought to live. And while the speakers throughout the day come from a variety of perspectives, and the thing that strikes me looking across the day is that there's a broad-based commitment to the value of free expression, and there are really three characteristics, and I want to leave you with this thought, three characteristics that exemplify what living that expression means. The first is a belief in human agency and the creative power, the dignity, the variety, and the worth of each individual. The second is a humility about what it is we can and can't control, and a humility about our ability to predict the future. And the third is that as we confront these real challenges, and the challenges are real and significant, the more that we can resist the urge to panic and engage in the type of thoughtful dialogue that so many of the speakers today have very ably modeled, I think the better off we'll all be. So I don't know how you could leave this room not optimistic. I am much more optimistic than when I walked in this morning. And so I want to thank everyone who was a part of that.
Thank you, Jesse. And then I would like to welcome our interim co-CEO, which is a great title. I love saying it every single time. Chris Calabrese from the Center for Democracy and Technology, also my boss, so,
Yes, if you want to be humble, try tying interim co in front of whatever it is that you're trying to do. It will definitely make you not feel quite as impressive. But what has been extraordinarily impressive are our speakers today. I have enjoyed every minute of this, and I go to a lot of events in Washington, and I cannot say that. So not just because people that I love and who work with me every day help put it together, but I really enjoyed it. And so I also know that I am standing between you and a very congenial discussion and maybe a few drinks. So I'll be very brief, but I do have to do just a few things. The first is to add my thank you. My thank you to Jesse and his team, who have helped us and have been wonderful partners through all of this. My thanks to the Newseum and the Freedom Forum, who have been wonderful homes to all of these ideas, not just to this event, but just to the idea of the First Amendment and the idea of democracy and how free speech underlies all of the values that make this town, when it's actually work really well. So we will miss you, but we know that it's not the end, and we look forward to working with the Freedom Forum, working with the Newseum in their new home, and so that's exciting. And I also have to thank the folks at CDT. A lot of time and effort, as you can imagine, has gone into this event. So thank you to Brian, thank you to Jamal, thank you to Emma, thank you to Liz, thank you to Elizabeth Seeger on our events team. Everyone has done a lot of work to make us here. And so if I can just have one last round of applause for those people. Thank you very much. And this is where I give my 2 cents. 2 things very briefly. So I thought a theme that came through really well, and it was curated, I think, very carefully, was sort of the mixed bag that is technology in this space, right? Whether it's censoring someone or whether it's lifting up voices, technology really is one of those things that is always 2 sides of the coin. It's always going to be the good and the bad. It's always going to be something that we have to, embrace the positive and sort of reject and regulate the negative. And that's very hard to do in this space because some of the old things that we rely on to sort of reject the negative, right? The idea that we can just pass regulations don't really work very well in the free speech context. So we have to think creatively, and we have to be interested in what different kinds of solutions there might be. And I really love the way we can kind of lift up some of those solutions. And so I think in order to get to good solutions, we need kind of 2 things. The first is a solid evidence base, and we heard that again and again and again. What's working? Not what do we think, what do we imagine, but what evidence do we have that things work? Too often technology is viewed sort of as magic fairy dust. Let's sprinkle it on whatever our problem is and we'll solve it. And I think we know that doesn't actually work, and we need, in fact, to figure out what technology does well and what it doesn't do well. So we're very excited at CDT to be partnering with the Knight Foundation to do some of this research, to really try to figure out what it is that's working in the context of free expression and what we can lift up. So I bring that up to tell you that we hope that you'll partner with us. We hope you'll help us try to figure out what some of the solutions are, or at least what are some of the questions that we should be asking. And so please do come to us, come to me at the happy hour, come to us, come to Brian in the future months and say, hey, this would be a really interesting project to work on. The last thing I think we need to sort of make the right decisions when it comes to technology and speech, beyond just evidence, is also to listen to our values. One of the best things about doing an event on free expression is you get such really good speakers. People who they understand the value of free expression because they like to speak. And we had a lot of that today. Really wonderful, diverse voices, people who understand how communities can be marginalized, how speakers cannot be heard in some cases, how we have to lift them up. And it's those values, those way that we think about how do we lift up the good speech, how do we deal with the bad speech, and how do we sort of embrace the values that kind of got us to this place where we are today, and maybe get us to a better place tomorrow. So with all of that, I hope that we can segue into this idea that we all have voices and we all should use them to enjoy a little networking at the happy hour. Thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate it.